in 2 hours of voiceover, let me give you an example. If you did 2 national spots a year, I don't know what it's like now, the rules are now, but if you did 2 national spots a year, and they each ran 2 cycles of 13 weeks each, you made more money than a full professor did in a year. Okay? Wow. Who, having that opportunity, would not do so? And since I came to despise academic life, the pettiness of it, the venom, the backstabbing, and look, if you're going to be a whore, at least get paid for it.
Yes.
Right? So what happened was, Rachel and I were living on Long Island, and George called us and said, you guys want to see the movie? I'm cutting it at the Brill Building. And it was a huge, like 2.5 hours long. And we'll go to dinner afterwards. Well, okay, fine. It's great to be here. It's a wonderful company. So we went to the Brill Building in the screening room, and we started to watch the 3.5-hour version. And it was so gory that poor Rachel was horrified. She kept throwing her hands over her eyes, and I kept saying, okay, Rachel, now, all right, okay. Shut your eyes, Rachel. This is a bad scene. Okay, you can open them now, Rachel. This is okay. And afterwards, we went to dinner with George. And again, a good sign of his sense of humor. At dinner, in those days at least, he was paying with cash. He pulled out this enormous roll of money and just threw it on the table and said, "Monopoly money." that was a kind of casual sense of it. And that's the George I remember and still think of with such enormous reverence. Enormous reverence.
Yes.
Were you aware, had any awareness, like when the film did come out, now it seems kind of quaint, but when it first came out, it was very controversial.
Oh yeah.
Were you aware of any of that happening at the time? You know, the bad reviews, the people who couldn't even sit through it to review it, and so forth, and just say how
only in the
horrible
sense that I didn't follow it like the previous panel. I make a distinction, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I make a distinction between my R-E-E-L work and my R-E-A-L. Okay? And I never pretended to be an actor. I'm not an actor. I never was and never will be. Okay? I just happened to get cast in a series of films that somehow resonated. And even today, I'm amazed by the longevity of these films. You know, we're now in 3 generations of people that are just around. It's astounding. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So in that sense, I was more interested in my writing and I was working doing voiceovers. And while yes, you can make a lot of money, you still invest a fair amount of time getting the work to begin with. So I was running back and forth between our home on Long Island and the city where the work was. And I really didn't have a whole lot of time, or frankly, in terms of priorities, following Dawn of the Dead or the Crazies was not a high priority for me. Okay? I had a ball doing it, make no mistake. I'm also always going to be grateful to George for the opportunity. If it hadn't been for George putting money in escrow to hire me, escrow was the Screen Actors Guild, I could never have had the career in voiceovers. Because what I did when I came to New York, I could immediately, because the money was there in escrow for me, I could immediately join. I didn't have to prove anything. Okay? And immediately was able to transfer from SAG to AFTRA, which is a union for voiceover artists. Okay? And I love being behind the it's wonderful being in a booth by yourself. Nobody knows who you are. You know, you do this work and you go about your business, and it's all over and done with. And people are listening to you, but they have no idea who you are. I love it. I really enjoyed that opportunity.
Now, I want you to talk a little bit to everybody about your work with, the works of Orson Welles. Richard is basically an Orson Welles scholar, but I want to preface it by mentioning, I didn't know this until recently, the last couple of years, but about Night of the Living Dead, the original Night of the Living Dead, one of the things George always said, because people would ask him, you know, for years, again, Night of the Living Dead's an old film, it's, you know, it's going to be 60 years old soon, but in the 70s, when there were a lot less modern horror movies, everybody's frame of reference to this black and white film was, well, maybe it's kind of like something, you know, like was Alfred Hitchcock an influence. And George Romero would always say, no, actually I was more influenced by Orson Welles. And I thought at the time maybe Citizen Kane. But a friend pointed out to me in the early, I believe it was the early 60s, Orson Welles did a series of Shakespeare films you probably know about, Othello and Macbeth.
And also his true cinematic masterpiece, the film called Chimes at Midnight. It's his Falstaff film. And I've been arguing that for years. So, if we have time, I'll tell you a little story about it.
So those movies had a low budget, right? His Shakespeare films had a much lower budget than he had even on something like Citizen Kane. And if you look at those films, the whole lighting style and environment of Night of the Living Dead is right there. And there's where George got that idea, how to get the atmosphere on a low budget with only certain amount of lighting. You know, you have to light people in, you know, pitch darkness. How am I going to get all, you know, this group of ghouls, or they're running to a truck? And he used a lot of the same lighting techniques, and so there's the influence. And it all just harkens back to George didn't want to make monster movies. He was influenced by these high dramas, you know, Shakespeare, Orson Welles' Shakespeare. On the Waterfront was another favorite of his. Tales of Hoffman, there's many films. George was really influenced by these kinds of films. What do you see with the connection there, knowing George, knowing his style, what he would have taken from something like those Orson Welles Shakespeare films that may not be apparent to people that watch horror movies and monster movies?
Well, I can't, I'm not a cinephile, so I can't give you a blow by blow. But certainly one thing is the auteur idea, where the director is also the editor, he's also the everything. You know, I mean, George I knew, like Orson Welles, physically edited his own films. Okay, so the decision making. That's what I mean by the auteur school. They are one and the same. There's a term for it in German called whatever. But it's where you are basically a one-man band, you know, and you do everything together. If George took inspiration from Orson Welles, he took inspiration from a pretty good source. He really did, because Welles used the medium deliberately black and white. He had opportunities to make color films, but he deliberately chose to make his films in black and white because he loved the idea of shadow and light and the effect that had. That's the original purest form of filmmaking.
Tell everybody a little bit about your work with, you know, the work of Orson Welles, like what you've done in that. As much as you can summarize it, because I know it's very extensive.
There too, something weird happened. I was my mentor, and who was here at the time at Carnegie Mellon, a man named Leon Katz. Leon was on sabbatical, and I was teaching and hating it in Rhode Island. This is before we went to Wisconsin. And so I came out, he was on sabbatical, he was at Yale doing some research. So I drove over to have lunch with him. And we're walking across the Yale campus, which I loved. I had a wonderful time at Yale. And he said to me, you know, Richard, if you're going to survive in academia, you need a book. You need to publish a book. I said, okay. I'm thinking I don't want to survive in academia, but all right. Because we just had our second child. And at that point, I needed a job. I needed a steady income. So he said, what do you know about Orson Welles? And I said, oh, he makes movies. And he said, well, he did other things too, Richard. So that ultimately ended up in a book called The Theater of Orson Welles. It had to do with his work in the theater, mostly Shakespeare production, by the way, prior to going to Hollywood. His work in radio and theater here in New York, all right? Lo and behold, that book turned out to be a landmark study.
Wow.
I was just writing a book to make myself viable if I had to stay in academic life, never realizing that what I had done was to write a book that now I had the incredible opportunity to interview all of Welles's collaborators in radio and theater because they were all still alive in the 70s. Okay, they all since have conveniently died. So everybody who writes about that has to go to as quoted by from such and such a book. So it became a landmark study. It was bizarre, but there you have it. And I thought I was through with him even after I was finished with academia. But I had all these, I'd written to Welles because I loved his Shakespeare productions. And I had the scripts. I collected them all. Including, by the way, I actually had in my possession the original script for War of the Worlds, that broadcast.
Wow.
The original script with his marginalia.
Oh, wow.
Okay? I went to CBS and they let me go through his radio scripts. They were about to shred them.
No.
They were going to put them on microfilm and shred them. So they begrudgingly gave them a desk and a box. And I had a huge box of scripts, so I stole it.
Yes.
Okay?
Woo! Rescued it.
So in interviewing Howard Potts about the broadcast, I brought the script here. I Xeroxed it. I brought the original script to Howard Potts, who's the actual author of the and he looked at it and he said it was like mammoth of heaven.
Wow.
I never realized what it was worth financially. Okay? Anyway, 10 years later, Mr. Potts auctions that off at $175,000.
Oh.
It wasn't mine, said it.
Just humble.
I think that's a really interesting take about George taking away from Orson Welles the whole auteur
Theory.
viewpoint. Because I've always said the way George worked is there's such a direct connection to the audience. You don't have another person doing the editing. You don't have, when he edited his own movies, he didn't have a different person writing the script. George did everything from the conception to the writing to the directing to the editing, and then like just the final overseeing of the.
That's the old pure school where you do the whole thing. You're the writer, you're the director. In Welles's case, very often, as he himself said, he couldn't afford another actor in that role, so he played it himself. He had a lovely line: "I'll do anything for the $100,000 that we're paying him per film in Hollywood, except to direct." Well, if you see his movies, you know what anything meant.
Yes.
Anybody have any questions for Richard? Come on.
Julian.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it. Hi Richard, I'm Julian. Your scene, whenever I watch the film, which I do a lot, whenever it comes on I get this absolute buzz. It's one of my favourite scenes in the film. So firstly, thank you so much for doing that. And I always wondered what happened to your character.
Wow.
That's the $64 question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The last one of these I did was like 3 or 4 years ago. I never thought about that. But the last one I did, somebody came up to me and said, "What happens to your character? The guy in Dawn of the Dead." And I sat there and thought, my God, I don't know. Did he live? Did he die? I have no idea. You know, I mean, to me, he existed in a time and place without any prehistory or any subsequent history. But that's a incredible. I started thinking, and when the more I thought about it, how could he survive? Nobody actually in George's film survives. You're all going to be gobbled up somewhere along the line. So I would assume he too would have had the same fate at some point.
Thank you, that's very great. I also wondered one other quick question, if I may. When I was lucky enough to go to the archives and read the early version of Dawn of the Dead, your character is one of the only similarities to the final film. So your character is very much present in that 1975 draft, and his plan to feed the dead actually is put into place. They do the plan, and you do find out what happens to your character. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Tell me.
Have you ever read? I wondered if you had ever read that.
I want to know.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you'd read it.
So that character is also named Miller Rausch.
It's very similar.
So I do die. I don't know what the hell.
So in it, your plan does get implemented, and then, spoiler, you get shot by the military because they find it so abhorrent. I'm sorry to break that to you, but it's... I feel really bad now.
That's terrible.
Why should
That
Dawn of
makes
the Dead
sense.
be different?
Makes
My
sense.
head split open. Yeah, pretty crazy. Why should I survive Dawn of the Dead? There's a very, if I may, when we were living on Long Island, racing with my two daughters and I, they had an 11 a.m. Saturday morning screening on television, Channel 11, bastards, of The Crazies. And so Rebecca and Miriam, Rebecca actually, my older daughter, invited all the kids in the neighborhood to see Daddy on television. Anyway, Miriam is like 6 years old, all right? And here she sees her father crashing into a wall and blood pouring out of his head. She went berserk. She had no idea, she had no grasp of the distinction between fantasy and reality, okay? She had to be brought upstairs, but I happened to be, thankfully I happened to be home. She was brought upstairs and she sat in my lap for at least an hour, and I'm rocking her and saying, honey, I'm okay, I'm okay. It's just where the hell do you get off showing a film that violent at 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning to children?
Oh, wow.
I found that, I objected to that.
Your character actually, in The Crazies,
Thank you, Julian. That was
Dr.
great.
Watts
Yep.
falls downstairs. Who did that stunt?
Yeah,
Was that you?
I objected. I wanted to do it myself. I'm not really. I wanted, because it was so transparently a fake, and I thought, the guy's going to roll, which is why they put down a ramp, and he rolled down the ramp, okay? And I get to gets to the bottom of the landing, and George puts me there, he's my feet up against one, he said, okay, but I want you to propel yourself into that wall, on the back of the thing, and I did. With some force, I have strong legs, and I was kind of dazed, and he said, okay, now fall over it, and I thought, easily, no problem. I fell up, and he said, now don't move. And the next thing I know is putting a tube behind my ear, and there's blood coming out. So I didn't know how all that worked out, because the shot of hitting the wall was, I hit my head against the wall, but it didn't hurt. I was just kind of dazed. But seeing that blood is what set Miriam off. She couldn't understand that was not my blood. But falling down, the guy did it. I'm sorry, it was a lousy job.
Just to point out Julian's question about the original Dawn of the Dead script, there was a different script that did have them all. It was before Dario Argento got involved. And George's idea for the film was that the couple is a very feral couple are living in the air ducts in the mall, and they only come down every so often to grab supplies. So it's not quite like the kind of comic book romp and adventure that the film eventually became. That's once Dario Argento became involved. I think he suggested that, George, you come to Rome, you're right.
Yes.
And so George went to Rome and wrote the version that we have. But any more questions? Come on, somebody has to have a question here.
Yeah.
Come on up.
Yeah, you mentioned Chimes at Midnight. What was the? How would you make that leap that Chimes at Midnight is a fall staff movie? How did you come to that conclusion? I guess you said you wanted to talk about Chimes at Midnight, the Orson Welles film.
What about it?
You said you wanted to talk about it, so I just wanted to hear what you had to say about it.
What,
You mentioned Chimes at Midnight.
so about Chimes of Midnight, what was your
You want to?
your take on it?
Your take on it.
You liked about it.
Everybody, we're dealing with Orson Welles now. Everybody believed that after Citizen Kane and all the attention, by the way, it's another film that bombed originally and had to be resuscitated. And it worked its way, as you probably know, all the way to the top of the best films ever sort of selections. It was there for 30 years on the top. I never thought it was his masterpiece. And I always, after seeing Chimes at Midnight, I thought, my God, this is so superior. Because Citizen Kane is one of those films where it's like you have a young person approaching the media, knowing very little about the media, and having a phenomenal imagination, and just going wild, and having an extraordinary cinematographer who can achieve these ideas that you have, okay? Whereas Chimes is the work of a master who was in complete control of the media in his autumnal years. You know, this is amazing work. And I can argue with that for years and years and years. And oh, no, you're wrong, you're wrong. So what happened was, in 2015, this Welles' centennial year, I was in Barcelona participating in an Orson Welles celebration. And we went to, and they remastered Chimes at Midnight. And all of the big guns of the movie critics, all of my enemies were there. and what was wonderful about it is they remastered it, but they specifically remastered the soundtrack, which is the real fault of that film. Okay? Brilliantly done. And at the end of it, this guy comes up to me, I won't go to the names. He said to me, "You bastard, you were right."
Yes.
One more thing about George. After we did Dawn of the Dead, I went off and I'd already started working and doing the voiceovers and all of that. And I heard that George was ill. I think he had some kind of serious problem. He had an operation or something, some serious kind of his kidneys or some I forgot what it was. But he was not in the best financial circumstances. So I tore up my contract and I sent it back to him and I said, "This is one debt you'll never have to worry about." Okay? And he wrote me the loveliest note, and that was the last contact I ever had with him.
Wow.
I wonder how many other people who are in this was involved in this film tore up their contracts and sent them back.
Any more questions? We have time for a few more.
Hello, sir. Nice to meet you. My question is, brilliant job with your character in Dawn of the Dead. Was that mostly your creation from the eye patch down and the whole manner in which you present yourself? And then number two, you mentioned you had a PhD. I was curious what that was in, and did you utilize that beyond Dawn of the Dead?
After I left academic life, I put my PhD away somewhere at the institution. I have no idea where it went. I lost that decades ago, and I've never regretted it. It was just, in fact, it was funny. I'm working with a guy in Istanbul. I was translating several of my plays. and he's working on his PhD as well. And I told him, listen, Anil, you can have mine. I'll send the damn thing to you. Hurry up and finish translations before I die. I turned 90 last month.
Wow.
So as a result, I don't have a world, I don't have a great deal of time there. But I think let's prioritize. As for the character, there is almost no difference between the two, the Watts and Rouse. There really isn't. The eye patch was George's idea, and that's it. I don't know what else to say about it.
Well, so Dr. Watts, what was the development of that character? Like, was it written that way? Did you have some input?
Yes. Watts, the character in Crazies, is the character as written. Okay, I had nothing to do with. I wouldn't have dared. I sort of shudder when people say I loved your character in Crazies because I felt like I was playing Jay Worthington Ham, and I really, it was too big a role for me, if truth be told. I shouldn't have had that role. It should have been a shorter role because I was jumping in feet first. And it was George's idea, it wasn't mine. And I think it shows.
Well, what did you think of that when?
Think of what?
You know, the role when it's handed to you.
Oh, I was flattered. My God, it's a large role. It's a pivotal role insofar as the structure of the film is concerned. But insofar as the person playing it, I don't think I was up to it. I really don't. So if you tell me how good I was, I'm going to shut it.
One more question. Come on up.
Hi. First of all, watching The Crazies and Dawn of the Dead, I've always gotten kind of Orson Welles vibes from your performance. Your performance kind of reminds me of Orson Welles in the pictures. So I just thought it was very interesting how... Sorry. My question is, you're a playwright, you're a scholar, you dedicated your life to these fields, and most people probably come up to you and say, hey, you were in Dawn of the Dead. And I just wondered how you feel about that, whether it's kind of its own little world.
I'm flattered, quite honestly. I really am. Don't get me wrong. This is insofar as prioritizing things. I would like to be as well known as a playwright as I am for being in Dawn of the Dead. For these three words, dummies, dummies, dummies. I would love to have my plays as well known as those three damned words. They are, by the way, in Europe. So my wife now, Elizabeth, for my birthday, bought me a T-shirt that says, I'm famous in Europe.
Well, this is Richard's third time here at the Living Dead Weekend, so I think he does enjoy it. So
Thanks.
thanks again for coming.